Hi, I'm Nayvin Gordon. I'm a retired family physician, live in California, in Oakland, California. And I've ever since this pandemic began, I've been writing, about the politics of it. So I'm here to help out.
That's great.
Okay, well, before we start, I did want to say that as far as I know, this rally that we're going to have in Sacramento is going to be the first public action for zero COVID and statewide, at least in California, demands of full masking, free masks in 95, and a protocol for mass testing, which we don't have in the United States yet, except at private schools, probably like Stanford, and also vaccines and ventilation, proper ventilation. So I think that this is a first step, and I think that it's an opportunity for education, which is what we need, because there's a lot of confusion out there about how people are being protected, and everybody's doing their own thing, and the lack of national healthcare, public healthcare is critical, because privatized healthcare and thousands of people are dying, and it could be millions. In fact, I read something today, you might have 1 billion people with the new variant developed in this world. So this is a very dangerous situation for teachers, students, communities, and the public. So this is critical. So thanks for joining us. We're just going around with introductions. If you wanted to introduce yourself, John. You're muted.
Done.
Hi, I'm John Walsh. I a transplant to the East Bay from Massachusetts, where I was at UMass Medical School for many years, and I'm very interested in the pandemic and especially how it's been handled by China, and how poorly we've done in comparison, and how little that's known in the West.
Very good. Thank you, John. Okay, well, why don't we start with Nayvin Gordon? And I've been working with Nayvin Gordon for some time to talk about, public health, capitalism, and the failure of our system to protect people. And now with this pandemic, this issue is a life and death for millions of people. And I think education is critical. So Nayvin has been writing about it, and maybe you can kick this thing off, Nayvin.
Hey, John, thanks for coming.
Thank you.
We'll definitely get together for coffee at some point. Well, I think the key thing is that there's been a huge amount of mass information, and there's been essentially a conspiracy of silence. And I'm sure I'm speaking to a lot of people who understand this now, but it began right from the beginning with the cover up of what was happening from the highest levels, from the presidency to the Congress to the intelligence committees and on down, to suppress the true situation. So long and short is, as Steve said, we are in a pandemic which, if we don't move to the zero COVID approach, which, as John said, China has done successfully, New Zealand has done successfully, Taiwan has done very successfully, we are going to be in this, forever. And this is a very dangerous virus. The dangers are being minimized. I was just speaking to some people today about the fact that they know individuals. My TAP teacher today told me he has just got COVID and was sick enough to be home, but not hospitalized. He had been immunized. He's 70. Another friend has their second episode of COVID, also being immunized, is now in the hospital. And what people don't really understand, and we're only really learning about it because it's really essentially a new virus, is how dangerous it is. It can kill people, obviously, but it can get people sick and damage the immune system. And this is where the whole danger of this long-term problem. Recently, there was a study in Nature, I believe, which showed how this virus, once you've been infected, even if you're not necessarily sick, you can be infected and asymptomatic or mildly ill or even sick. You develop autoantibodies, these antibodies that then can attack your body. And they'll attack various parts of your body, your blood vessels, your heart, etc. But they can also attack the immune system. And the immune system then is damaged so that you get over this virus, but when it comes back again in 3 or 4 months, you are less able to deal with it. And this was clearly shown in South Africa shortly after the alpha virus, the original virus made it to South Africa. Within about 4 months, they developed a variant there. And many people who were sick the first time around died within 4 to 6 months after the second one. So basically, the issue is here, how do we get the information out now to people so that they understand, because there's a mass blackout on the reality that the only way out of this is to apply standard health, public health measures successfully. And as John said, and as Steve said, we have plenty of examples to show us. China's done it, Taiwan's done it, New Zealand's done it. I believe Iceland's also done a great job. Vietnam has done an excellent job. Singapore did good work on this. So people in this country are really not aware that over 1 billion people on this planet are living essentially a zero COVID existence. So I'm really behind raising this issue now, and I think it's a great time to get started. And this rally that you guys are planning is going to be very important, and we can start to spread the word. Just to take off on one thing you said, there are many, I've read repeated examples of students and faculty refusing, along with parents, to go into the schools. I mean, from Hawaii, there's a stay home, parents stay home movement. There's movements all over the country where people are trying to reject this policy of allow the virus to spread throughout the country. So we're really not alone. It's just that we're very disconnected and people don't have a concept of what the way out is. So the more we can spread the concept of zero COVID, and the organizations that are trying to spread the word will be in a much better position. So if I can help you in any way, I'm here to do that.
Thank you, Nayvin. So our next speaker is Charles Rachlis, who actually spoke at a heat rally that we had, and it was the only really education that's been done at San Francisco City Community College on the virus and what people should do about it, what the institution should do about it. The union has not put anything out. The administration has not put anything out, and there's a vacuum. So he was actually provided some important information at that rally about what is required to really protect against the virus. So welcome, Charles.
Thank you, and thank you, Dr. Nayvin. And I saw some of the notes that you had forwarded earlier, in particular referring to respiratory protection, and as you're a higher level of education than myself, you would be ranked higher on the level of expertise. And being a Cal-OSHA inspector, levels of expertise are appreciated in the hearing room when you have to advance your case as to why you may have cited a employer for violations of the various regulations. And so although I have a bit of training as an industrial hygienist and a safety engineer, a particle physicist or an MD would be considered a higher level of expertise on these things. So if you feel to jump in at any point when we're talking about respiratory protection and particles and things like that, please do. I really don't know where to start with this, but I did retire about a week ago. And for the last year and a half, what I've been doing at the Oakland District Office of Cal-OSHA as the inspector, as a safety inspector and a senior safety inspector with an industrial hygiene background was I was enforcing Title 8, 5199, the aerosol transmissible disease standard. And it's a standard that was written, maybe 8 or 10 years ago in response to zoonotic disease and the lack of a tuberculosis standard and the implications of aerosol transmissible diseases and how things like measles and the earlier SARS and MERS and Ebola and tuberculosis. So at that time, they didn't know Ebola was coming. They didn't know COVID was coming, but they did know a whole series of diseases that are passed on as airborne infectious diseases. And maybe we can do a little bit of the history of what was happening in March. For me, this really all started in February 2020 when we heard about the ship coming into Oakland. And of course, Cal-OSHA got a call and we had to send somebody down. And I had just fallen off my bicycle and screwed up my shoulder and didn't feel competent to go down and protect myself. So we sent some junior safety engineers to stand outside at quite a distance with support from a advanced industrial hygienist as well. And they monitored that coming in, and we saw the numbers and we were just talking about it. And it was like, oh, there's 7,000 in the world today. I said, this is going to be 15,000 next week. This is going to blossom and bloom. And then unfortunately, I had to go to attend to my father's passing in Colorado, where I went to the hospital. And I wore an N95 because I was trained and I understood that if I'm going to fly with other people, I should be wearing an N95 because this is an airborne infectious pathogen. In other words, it's not just contact and droplet spread. In other words, this whole thing that we've been hearing that it's going to drop out of the air in 6 feet, or that the surgical mask or the cotton mask that people have been wearing are going to protect you is all incorrect information. And at the beginning, CDC and WHO, they knew very well that at least the best science of universal precaution says this is a novel virus, and we have it written in 5199 in Appendix A, which you can get to through the definitions in subsection B. And in subsection B, you have the definitions of airborne infectious pathogen and airborne transmissible diseases. And they refer you to Appendix A, which tells you that until they're categorized, novel viruses need to be treated as airborne infectious. Now, why is that important, and what happened? That's really important because as airborne infectious disease, the understanding is it will fill the air and it will float on the air. It's heavier than a mist or a spit, lighter than a mist or a spittle. It's just going to float and fill the air when the infected person is in the area and is exuding viral, right? So that's the understanding. And until they get to a higher level of understanding of science research that tells them, oh, it's not airborne, then you have to treat it as such. Well, CDC, WHO backtracked on that immediately. And I was dealing with my family issues, and I had to call into a Cal-OSHA talk that was given by one of our leading retired Inuit CIHs, a very highly respected leader of the historic leader, and actually the person that wrote 5199, and another safety engineer. And they gave us the training of what was the decision, how we were going to go forward. And I could see them, I could feel it through the way they were teaching us or training us, that this backtracking was something they were not happy with. But because it had come through WHO, CDC, and California Department of Public Health had accepted it, all of a sudden, we're stuck with a contradiction between what is coming down from World Health Organization all the way down to the local public health authority of how this is transmitted, and the logic of Appendix A 5199, which tells us that it's airborne until proven otherwise. So what was the implications of this, and how did that translate out to what was going on in the hospitals and the skilled nursing facilities, and ultimately is still going on in the public? And unfortunately, I think this is a big this is a piece of the history that helps us understand what's going on now. So if indeed it's not airborne infectious disease, then what you can do is you can have service and care for suspect and known confirmed cases of COVID. You can have service and care in a surgical mask, and they don't have to be in an airborne isolation room in the hospital. But if it is an airborne infectious disease, they have to treat it the same way they would treat a tuberculosis patient. They put them in a quarantine, a special room called airborne infection isolation room that has been designed to vacate the air in about 46 minutes, every 12 air changes per hour. So it takes about 46 minutes to totally turn the air clean after someone vacates the room. And it should have an anteroom. And that's how you're supposed to treat these patients. Well, the hospitals, not just in California, but across the country, were overwhelmed. And they didn't have that many airborne infection isolation rooms. And that was just a piece of the problem. The other piece was that the hospitals latched onto this and said, we're going to follow WHO and CDC and CDPH regulations, and we're not going to require that the care people are using N95s, although, and because they said they're not going to require it, what they did was they restricted access to the N95s, and people are using them over and over, bringing in their own, using them that are not fit tested, and then we had, you know, a lot of sick and some fatalities, and indeed that's part of what I was doing in the last year and a half, was dealing with the fatalities and the serious illnesses that became Cal-OSHA cases. So about 6 or 8 months later, the science was overwhelming. There's study after study, and CDC, WHO had to concede. There was a big letter in the New York Times, 260 doctors and other professionals of higher levels of training than myself and expertise signed this, and the CDC couldn't hide anymore. And during that whole time, I'm going head to head with the lawyers from, and I can say it now, Kaiser and Sutter and other skilled nursing facilities in the area. The skilled nursing facilities were a little better, but these other lawyers and the owners of these organizations, or the CEOs, they were saying, no, you know, we're going to go with the WHO, not with Cal-OSHA. And so you see how that's split there, because the governor here was not willing to put his foot down. And we said, well, why did this happen? And I'm not going to promote a conspiracy theory, but they claimed there were shortages of N95s. And where were they getting them? They were getting them from China. And why were they getting them from China? That's because of the outsourcing of production from the United States to China and many other countries, where they can drive down wages and up profits, because we're in a terminal crisis of capitalism, which is one of the issues of how this happened, because part of the terminal crisis of capitalism is it commodifies everything, and it destroys nature, and it impedes upon habitat. And that's how we get the zoonotic diseases coming at us. So that's a bit of the history of how we got there. And then how do we get out of this? I think the zero COVID policy is based on basic public health, which is we need to have ventilation and we have to have masks that work. Having people using surgical masks and cotton masks don't work. They're not designed to stop an airborne infectious pathogen from escaping or going around the room. The N95 is required, and many people don't understand what the 95 means. I've had debates with conspiracy theorists, and they're saying, well, it's okay then for 5% of the particles to get through. And anybody that wants to jump in and help explain how an N95 actually works, my understanding is that the N95, and we do also have HEPA filtration, and that would be an N100, and that's what's on the powered air purifying respirators that the doctors have to use while they're conducting aerosol generating procedures with these patients. The 95 or the 99, basically that's the bottom of the efficacy curve. As a micron of 0.3 approaches the mask. Say a particle of 10 microns hits the mask, it's just going to get stuck at the top level. And as the microns get smaller and approach 0.3, the efficacy of stopping it goes down from 100% down to 95%, at which point the curve starts to go back up. And when they're even smaller than 0.3 microns, you get a higher than 95% efficacy. If someone wants to correct me, please go ahead. That's my basic understanding of why an N95 is so important, and why it's important to understand that these virum are in the 0.1 to 0.4 size, and they are effectively stopped by an N95 respirator that's properly fit tested and worn on someone without a beard in the proper manner. So we've been wearing surgical masks at work or all over the place, and really that doesn't protect the wearer. It really only stops a percentage of what someone who may be infected is spitting out. So unfortunately, the conspiracy folks, they go on about the masks and how the masks don't protect you, and to a certain extent they're right. The masks don't protect the individual wearer. They do afford a certain amount of public health protection, both from the wearer protecting the other, and a small amount of protection from what's in the surrounding. But once we understand this is an airborne infectious pathogen, and it floats on the air and goes longer than 25 feet, now we have the issue of the slaughterhouse or the schoolroom, which is going to become a slaughterhouse pretty quickly, where the air is not vacated with a high level of air changes per hour, like a BSL-3 laboratory would have like 15 air changes per hour and would vacate in like 30 minutes. And an airborne infection isolation room, I said, had 12 air changes per hour, vacates in about 45 minutes. These schools don't have those regulations. And Cal-OSHA has a regulation for increasing ventilation to what is possible with the existing system. In other words, they're not saying, go in there and overhaul your system completely and get us 12 air changes. That still just applies to the hospitals and the airborne infection isolation rooms. So that's the backstory. I could talk a little bit about the cases and about the nurses and about the fatalities without going into too much detail. Basically, the nurses took on the fight for their PPE. And that included making complaints against Cal-OSHA. It included having picket lines, not picket lines, informational rallies outside the hospitals. What they didn't do was go on strike. And that might have changed things rapidly. because the hospitals couldn't deal with that. And because they didn't do that, well, unfortunately, it dragged on for all this time until we were able to beat them, at least Kaiser, in hearing. I know there's other hospitals that are still waiting for their turn in front of the administrative law judge. And I'm in the middle of one case now, even though I'm retired, with Sutter. And they're still sticking to their guns. And in some cases, the nurses are, and in some cases, they're not getting the N95s that they need for each use. And that's part of the issue too, is an N95 is designed for a single use. It's not designed for wearing and donning and doffing, putting it on and off 8 or 10 times a day. And that's what was happening. And the more you put it on and off, the less its efficacy is. And we have studies from NIOSH, the National Institute of Occupational Safety and Health, and UCSF that actually show a diminution of the efficacy of the N95. So that's how, I was feeling very gaslighted fighting these lawyers. And that's why I was so happy to see your notes addressing this exact issue. And then in terms, I think I'll wrap it up there and maybe take a second round and talk about the politics of zero COVID and working class participation in a fight to save humanity after people take around. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Charles. And one question we have to ask is, it's been over 18 months since the pandemic has taken place, yet we still don't have enough N95 masks for even the nurses. They're still fighting to have, be able to get rid of them once they use them. And that is a crime, really. So I'd open it up for people to make any questions or comments. You can put your hand up if you want to do that to reactions.
Well,
Okay, yeah, Nayvin?
I just want to say that history is very important to know, particularly about the fact that it's airborne and how to protect yourself. And I think that raises the issue that we face today, which is the mass transmission and the need for the classic public health measures. And once Biden, the CDC, et cetera, opened up the country in June, they removed all public health, social distancing restrictions. What that has allowed is mass transmission through the country. And transmission can only be stopped by the approach of zero COVID. And as long as we allow mass transmission, people are going to be getting sick. And so the big issue now for people is, is talking about ending this pandemic. And that means ending mass transmission. And that's where we got to go from here.
And maybe Michael can talk about this, because Michael took the initiative, Michael Hull, and set up Teachers Against Dying website. Why a rank and file social studies teacher would have to have a website called Teachers Against Dying. It seems pretty strange, but that's the situation we're in. Michael, you want to talk, and then Madeline?
Oh, sure. We had someone raise their hand, Madeline. If
Oh, Madeline. Okay, Madeline, you want to go?
Yeah, this is just a teeny detail on the K94s, which are now being touted even more than the N95s. Can those be repeated wearing, Charles?
And a KN95s are not fit testable because they loop around the ears.
Yeah,
although they're made with a similar material to stop penetration, the reason that we don't advance them in occupational health and safety is because in occupational safety and health, we know that there is something that we have to protect ourselves from. And it's not a question of, oh, can we maybe protect ourselves? No, We need something that is fit,
Right.
testable, and provable. If I have a box of KN95s and I'm happy to use them, you know, when I go
But
somewhere.
yeah, when you shave your beard. But meanwhile, I mean, my question was that repeatability of them is no matter what you use, you should just use it once.
Well, I'm not saying use it and throw it away. I'm saying that because it's not fit testable, you don't know its efficacy when you're wearing it. So, you know, you're wearing it for that errant shot. Somebody out there might have something. An occupational exposure is, I'm on a COVID ward and I know that somebody's going to open the door and I'm going to get a burst of air possibly from somebody that's got COVID. So I want a fit tested N95 or higher level on me. You're going somewhere where, well, the chances of exposure are pretty low, and you're not going to be there providing bodily services and brushing their teeth for them. So, you know, I wear my KN95 over and again, and I don't expect a whole lot more protection from it than I do a surgical mask. And I'm not going for occupational protection, and I stay away from people. But
all of the above, yes.
You can't use it in an occupational setting that requires an N95. Let's put it that way. Yeah.
Okay, and that's good to know. Thanks.
So, Michael.
Okay, good question, thank you. So the impetus for Teachers Against Dying was that this was a deadly situation, and what I noticed a lot amongst my colleagues was a sort of normalization of it. We're going to have to live with it, and I guess that's what zero COVID is all about. It's about challenging that narrative of we're just going to have to live with it. If people die, they have to die, and, you know, herd immunity and all of these types of things. And what really got me were in some of these groups on the internet, on Facebook, they were saying, post a picture of yourself with your PPE and your shield, your face shield, and they had like glitter on their face shields. And I was thinking, are you gonna put glitter on your ventilator? What the hell is this? You're normalizing insanity, and it's insane to have children packed on school buses in an aerosolized pandemic with face shields and masks, and it was crazy. And the only one that covered my story, which was me getting forced out, like thousands of other educators who had underlying health conditions, and doctors told them, don't go back, it's not safe in person. And they were forced to choose between their life and their livelihood. I had to choose and leave a profession that I loved and worked very hard to get into, because I am a caretaker for my sister, I'm a caretaker for my uncle. I'm at risk, and I wasn't willing to put people at risk. Luckily, I was in a situation, because I'm a pretty cheap guy. I save up all my money. So I've always had, like, you know, something set aside for emergencies. And I was lucky enough to be able to circumvent this. And then I also got pandemic assistance, which Governor Abbott cut off. But people are dying and teachers are dying. And this idea that we have to normalize it, and the idea that only World Socialist website, or, you know, like something like Steve Zeltzer will put on, that's the only exposure it gets. Because I've actually gotten interviews with people in The Guardian or Texas Tribune or something like that. And I always make it a point to say, this is a rotten system. We're being forced back to die because the billionaire elite want a subsidized daycare to continue on their minimum wage economy. That's what this is about. We have a system that's set up around private profit over social needs, and everything takes precedent to the economy. And even our lieutenant governor here, Dan Patrick, said that the grandma and grandpa should be honored to die and sacrifice themselves for the Dow Jones. And so one of the most frustrating things about all this is the media. you hear nothing about this. I remember it was like North Korean propaganda where they have, the kids are all happy with their masks, everyone's compliant, it's all wonderful, everything's great. And we have pediatric hospitals right now that are filling up. Kids are getting this and spreading it. It's, there's studies that show the kids' infections that occur antecedent to the adults. I mean, it's contributing massively. And I don't know about any other profession that's as exposed to COVID as a school teacher. You're in that building, it's aerosolized. They don't have good ventilation in a lot of cases. People are constantly breaching the mask. What is a more at-risk profession? And you have a lot of at-risk individuals in that profession. And what I really want to stress is, it's never gonna, we have to take things into our own hands, period. I contacted my union. I was at NEA, AFT, nothing. They told me to pound the sand. I even got an audience with Randy Weingarten, and I told her, there's no masks in Texas. All of these idealized prerequisites to reopening safely, which you've pushed, they're not happening. What are you going to do about that? What are you going to do about all the people that at the very least the union should have fought for that needed medical accommodations? Nothing. So I started Teachers Against Dying. It's kind of a protest group, but now I've also started a database, because one of the things I recall, I got retaliated against, of course, and one of the reasons I left was because I didn't want to deal with it anymore. They just kept coming and coming and coming, and I felt very isolated. So what we did is we set up a national database where teachers can cross-reference violations and COVID infractions. And we have links to OSHA, we have links to EEOC, we have links to all these places, and we can actually cross-reference violations. And hopefully we have a lawyer on retainer. Hopefully we can get some type of a legal action. I think that also has to be a component in it. Just like the Civil Rights Act, that movement, they had a legal component. They've got to be more afraid of us than we are of them. And that's where I think they're winning, is we're afraid we're going to lose everything, and there's no way that we can fight back, because the people that were supposed to fight for us, the establishment Democrats and the unions, this trade union bureaucracy, they haven't done their job. And so we're just kind of trying to fill in that space. But that's what this is all about. And the most disgusting thing about it all is that it is preventable. We could have had zero COVID. Other countries with less resources and that are very densely populated and packed together and close to the epicenter, like Vietnam, they're doing outstanding compared to us, who is the wealthiest, richest nation in the history of Earth. We couldn't even get PPE for the nurses. I mean, it's a crisis of capitalism. That makes me kind of unpopular with some people, but I'm just going to say it. That's what it is. We have a system that's based around a tiny cabal of billionaires, and school system is the linchpin for that, because they need the daycare. And I just will keep stressing that, and hopefully raise awareness. But I like that we're having these panels and that people are talking about zero COVID, because that's what needs to be done. And this idea that you have to live with it, it's brutal, it's homicidal. It reminds me of Ukrainian famine in USSR, or the Irish potato famine, or the Nepalese famine. It's social murder insofar as we're letting something go. It's criminal negligence, and the government will do nothing except promote it. And they're doing it on purpose to keep their profits churning. And when we look back on this, I know I'll be on the right side of history, and so will everybody here.
Thank you, Michael. Anyone else would like to comment or ask questions?
I'll take a second round if.
Okay, yeah, go, Charles.
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of take a look at it from a political point of view, and following on what you just said. I think most of us are in agreement that this is a crisis of capitalism, a crisis of a for-profit system that's gone on way too long. And we have to consider, how can we get to zero COVID? Is this something that the capitalist class can do? will do or will drag on and won't get to until too many of us are dead. In fact, too many of us are already dead. I think that even the trade union bureaucracy has stood down. They're so used to just following the leadership of the Democratic Party that they don't stand up for health and safety. There are tools there. If you read the Cal-OSHA Act, and many of the federal acts are going to follow Cal-OSHA's, the tools are in there, the regulatory tools are in there. And if we had class struggle trade unionism, and they would be building health and safety committees in every work site to understand the regulations. And they would train the people to understand the regulations, and that would do a lot to counteract the conspiracy consciousness that's out there. So besides fighting in the unions for class struggle trade unions that educate and mobilize the members, I think we need to fight for fully funding and staffing the health and safety agencies, which Cal-OSHA has been chronically understaffed with basically one inspector for every 90,000 workers, and many states have many more. We have to provide universal free testing and contact tracing. Now there's a talk of mandated vaccine or testing every week. I don't know that testing every week is sufficient, because I've seen cases where somebody was tested on Monday and 3 days later they were positive, even though they were negative on Monday. On Wednesday, they had already been spreading it around the whole work site for 2 days. We need regular testing. In the lockdown that happened in the economy, that could have been effective, but it wasn't run by the working class, and it was under the major pressure of the capitalist class to drive us back to work. And for those people that were considered essential workers, the protections weren't there. That one, they were using the false information from WHO and CDC at the time that it was droplet precautions, so they didn't protect the slaughterhouse workers who brought it back to the poor communities where they live. So if there's a lockdown and to get to zero COVID, we could probably wrap this up in about 2 days, because there's a 10-day period of being infectious. It should be run by the working class and should make sure that everyone who's locked down and needs support gets the food, gets the medicine, and gets the care that they need, so that people aren't feeling the economic pressure to go back to work. Oh, I have to get back to work. And anyone that is essential needs to be fully protected by the science. So that means N95s and separation, et cetera, et cetera. We need full transparency in the proceedings of the WHO and the CDC and who's behind that, because without that information, it just opens up to all the conspiracy theorists who turn it into some sort of anti-Semitic cabal of eugenicists that are in the background creating, some sort of conspiracy, instead of actually looking at the science, which is painful enough to look at. We need to free the scientists and the medical research from private capital so we can trust it. And we need to bring these scientists who created the vaccines together to look at how are the vaccines working, and can we improve them? They've been out over 1.5 years. And because we have intellectual property rights, Pfizer, Moderna, AstraZeneca, everybody owns their own vaccine. This is the product of human intellectual labor. It should be the property of all, and it should be under the introspection of science and medical scientists looking at this and trying to make this stuff work. So I think we need to nationalize the companies of big pharma, and we need to run them under workers' control without indemnifying, without paying off the big shareholders. These should be run by the working class. And we need to protect the global South. We need to communicate with the peoples of the global South and bring them factories to produce the medical resources and vaccinations they need, and bring them the precursors, and take the profit out of this. And that can only be done by a workers' government. And that's why I'm supporting the fight for a Labor Party. And I think only a workers' government is going to be able to stop and get us to zero COVID without many millions more dying.
Thank you, Charles. Before we go on, I did want to let people know, I and Charles and others have been fighting to hire more Cal-OSHA inspectors. There are less than 200 inspectors, OSHA inspectors in California. This is over 18 months after the pandemic in California. So I would say that Gavin Newsom is criminally negligent, as well as Biden, because there are less than 2,000 health and safety inspectors in the United States for 130 million workers. And my view is, if you don't have enough inspectors and safety engineers, hygienists, then you're going to let people die. And that is exactly what's happening in factories and workplaces. And that will happen at City College. It will happen at these other facilities when they open up. So it's murder is what it is, corporate murder that's going on. And that's what we're going to face. Madeline, you're on board.
Well, I want to hear John Walsh's, I don't want to
John?
use up too much time, but I do have one little thing, and then maybe at the end. Through my head, I've been thinking, okay, slogans, and we're against these super patriots, I don't take away my freedom. And I thought, okay, what is it? Our Declaration of Independence, the government is set up for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. I just read that whole document again last night. It's a pretty good document. I forgot about it. But life, that's what the government's supposed to do. I think we can sloganize that we are the patriots in this meeting. We're the ones supporting life and liberty to get life. And then pursuit of happiness, I want to talk about a little bit at the end, because I'm a musician and I have a little soapbox to say there. But that whole emphasis, and I thought maybe we can just undercut all these patriots, especially in Texas, you poor man, and just say, no, we're the patriots, because it's our government is founded on life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. You got to live first. Okay, then my little soapbox.
Okay, John, did you want to add anything, John?
Well, I came to listen, not to talk. I actually don't know where to begin, but it obviously, whatever level you want to take this, the United States is, and the Western world in general is not doing all that could be done. And it clearly that was done for the sake of the economy in large part, just to keep it going. And it turns out, if you look at China, the wisest thing to do was the well, you can call it the COVID zero policy, because the economy got on its feet quite quickly. The moral thing to do, also a very profitable thing to do. It can help people in their lives and their prosperity. So I see problems here. I haven't thought enough about what the solution is. I mean, it is good that people at the grassroots do something, because basically, again, to go back to China, if people really understood, I mean, really saw what was happening and understood it, and understood that we have suffered almost 700,000 fatalities now, needlessly. I think the anger out there would be extraordinary, but people don't understand that. They think, well, we're doing the best that could possibly be done. And so, because we are the best that there possibly is. So how could it be otherwise, right? We're the exceptional ones. So, and the other part of it is to look for a technical solution, which is part of the solution. The vaccines are crucial, but it is obviously not the whole solution. And it may be with a rapidly mutating virus, like RNA viruses are, and this one is in particular, it may be a smaller part of the solution in the end. So, and a high-tech solution sometimes might not even be the best one, because we are not immunizing people against the virus. We're immunizing people against a certain conformation of the spike protein. And so mutations in that, if they're clever enough, can elude vaccines to one degree or another. At least the inactivated vaccines that appear weaker, and they're certainly less efficacious, they vaccinate you against the entire virus. So the virus has to do a little bit more than just change a single protein, a single amino acid or a few amino acid mutations. It has to do a lot more than that. So, where we are now in terms of public health measures versus vaccine technical measures, I don't know, but it's clear that it's clear for this and for future pandemics, which are coming, that we have to put those public health measures in place. And if our social mores and our type of society is incapable of doing that, then we're incapable of preventing us from losing more lives than we lost in World War II, or I think it's getting close to the Civil War now. So that's the way I see it. I haven't thought it through as completely as some people here have.
Thank you, John. And I think that the people have been propagandized about the issues. I mean, the question that has to be asked, even with Biden's latest proposal to vaccinate people in places that have more than 100 work locations. First of all, why he didn't do that 18 months ago, and then second of all, who's going to enforce it? If there are less than 2,000 OSHA agents, who's going to enforce it? Because part of public health would require that they hire a couple of 100,000 healthcare workers that could do the tracking and tracing of people. That's not being done. So basically, the pandemic, the virus is running wild throughout this country. And the other question I think that we have to look at is the danger of a collapse of our healthcare system, because the healthcare workers, and I don't know, Charles, you've talked with these nurses, they're getting burned out. They're getting sick, they're getting COVID, and they're getting burned out. And in Texas, I know, in North Carolina and Georgia and these other states, Louisiana, they're even attacked by people. The healthcare workers are being attacked for a fake virus. So we're in a very dangerous situation in the United States, because if you have a overload and collapse of our healthcare system, that means people not only who have COVID, but other people who have heart attacks and other diseases, they're going to die. They're not going to be able to get a hospital bed. So this is really a national emergency. We're talking about the greatest emergency perhaps in the history of the United States. And yet this government, this capitalist government, treats it in a way as business as usual. There's no national mobilization. In fact, even with the hurricane in Louisiana, people are still without electricity. Another hurricane is hitting Louisiana and Texas. And the armada that was used, the armada to remove people from Pakistan, these planes and others should be going there with troops and VGs to get the electricity going and protect people. It's not happening. So they're catastrophic losses. And I think that our rally is important. At least it'll be the first one to say zero COVID, we have solutions. But it means that the billionaires are going to have to pay for this crisis. You're going to have to shut down. It may require a general strike to shut down the United States, to force the capitalists to do what's required, or replacing them. I mean, workers should take it in their hands. I agree, because at this point, how can we, there aren't the agencies that are enforcing the rules. I mean, that's even these rules at Cal-OSHA. And I know that Charles has done the best he can to prosecute these hospital executives, but basically they get a slap in the hand, they may get a fine, there's no criminal penalties. And in my view, if companies, if executives, if administrators put people into harm's way and they die, they should be criminally prosecuted for murder. That's what should happen. And that is not being called for by the Democrats, they're basically going along with the complete failure to really enforce even the regulations that we have.
Steve?
Yes.
I
Nayvin.
just to add to your point, I just read that I believe this last week, the California legislature passed a law that prevents the public health department in California from publicly identifying outbreaks in industry. The information about COVID outbreaks will go only to the industrialists, only to the owners of the businesses, but not be divulged to the people.
So, I mean, that's, I think the clearest example of that was the stand in place, the shelter in place rule in Alameda County by the health department that actually shut down small businesses, small business owners, but allowed the Tesla plant. And the other point that I want to make is in China, there's a Tesla plant. They haven't had a virus breakout at that Tesla plant, unlike Tesla in Fremont. They're Amazon plants. They haven't had the breakout of the Amazon plants in China. And the reason is the government, and I have disagreements with the government at least has said to the capitalists and their billionaires and capitalists in China, you are not going to have a COVID outbreak. And if you do, you're going to be shut down. They understand that. Here, we can't get that message, that action, because the Democrats and Republicans are basically controlled by these billionaires. And that's really the obstacle that we face that has to be addressed. I mean, we can't get the kind of action that's needed with the Democrats and Republicans. I mean, Gavin Newsom was cutting back and bleeding, starving the public health agencies in California in the budget. I mean, we have a massive budget surplus. It wasn't going to public health. And you would think also that in the midst of the biggest pandemic in 100 years, that would have been basis to say we need national health care coverage for all. I mean, that's the time to say we need national health care. They're still not passing national health care. People are still being charged for trips to the doctor and being at the hospital. So this is really insanity, and it's the insanity of a system that is completely out of control, in my view.
And I just wanted to say, one of the reasons we have, and I do want to extend this, I'm going to try it out with teachers, but I want to extend this paradigm or this database to other fields, because one of the things I've seen is, well, just look at Rebecca Jones. That's a perfect example of how they want to cover it up to normalize the situation. It reminds me kind of like the gun violence. They would give you thoughts and prayers, but business as usual. We're just going to normalize the death. You can't really do that with this as much because the hospitals, like you say, are overflowing. Once that collapses, it's going to be, I don't know how they're going to respond, but we have to have a way of documenting and reporting independently, because, and to compare that to the official, that whether it be a district or a campus or a workplace, wherever, just to at least demonstrate, this is a cover up essentially, and it's a cover up in the media because they're kowtowing to their corporate advertisers too. And one more thing I wanted to say, I've often thought about this. Was this happened by default, by serendipity, or was this deliberate? Which, what I saw was the initial big problem, which was when they did the lockdown, they didn't take over payrolls. They didn't do a UBI. They let businesses fail. They transferred wealth up, and they made people angry with each other. So the people that wanted to protect life, they had to lose their job, and it was versus the people that wanted to protect their job, and they went with herd immunity. I don't know if they did that deliberately, if that just happened by default, but I do know they sold their stocks off, and I do know they took advantage of the CARES Act to transfer money up. And I'm so frustrated that the anger was between those two groups of, it either has to be lockdown and lose your job versus die and keep your income. Like that's where the debate kind of digressed to. And if they did that on purpose, I think that was evil genius, because I don't think we've recovered from that. I mean, and Trump has a lot of fault, lays at his feet because he politicized this. He said it was a hoax. He let the PPE go to China. He didn't encourage mask wearing. Yeah, there was insider trading going on. So that's my biggest frustration. But I do think, I hope this little thing that I'm doing will at least kind of expose, the reality versus what they're manufacturing consent with. So I just wanted to add that because the biggest problem here in Texas is, there's people, I always say we're still debating heliocentrism and evolution here. So the big debate here is like, should you even wear a cloth mask? That's the debate. It isn't lockdowns. The debate is if a woman should be forced to carry her baby to term, and you're deputizing citizens to go after them. That's what's happening here in Texas. So it almost causes me to go into despair. Like, what the hell, are we gonna do? But I'll keep trying, but I'll keep doing what I can. I just know I'm doing the right thing, but maybe you could speak to that despair of someone like me that, I just see this all around. It's like, it seems almost hopeless.
Well, I think the only solution to individuals getting depression, and there's a lot of depression. I mean, I want to, when I speak on the 20th, I'm going to talk about people thinking about this pandemic going on for 5 or 10 years. Can you imagine? Can you imagine this going on for 5 or 10 years? Because that's what we're looking at. And I think when people start to think about that this could go on many, many years, maybe it will wake some people up that radical action is needed. Because I don't want to have to live another 5 or 10 years with this pandemic. And that's exactly what we're facing in this country and around the world. I mean, I think we've got to be, honest with people. This isn't going away. It's going to get worse. And we can't control it with the present structure that we have in this country and around the world. Rick, you had your hand up?
Yeah, I was just going to make a few comments. Maybe I'm preaching to the choir, so sorry if this is redundant for anyone. But I think the bottom line is that we have to recognize that capitalism is an irrational system. And that it's not just the pandemic that's a problem. Just look at global warming, that we're still adding to our military, and the threat of nuclear warfare is still ever present. I mean, there's a new Burns Woodward book today about how, they were concerned in the Pentagon that Trump might try to launch a war somewhere to save his ass at the end of his so-called presidency, and how they were going to create safeguards against that. I mean, we live in an irrational system. I mean, I learned that years ago when I read Monopoly Capital. Their last chapter is the irrational system. And this pandemic is bringing a lot of that out. I mean, the workers who should be most protected are the essential workers, and they're probably the least protected in our system. They're being forced to go into dangerous workplaces, and they end up getting the disease. I mean, it's bringing out the class differences more than other things often do. Look who's the people who are predominantly dying from everything I've read are people of color who are predominantly working class and working class people. One of the ironies of all this is that these anti-vaxxers and the people in the South, I mean, if I was a Republican strategist, I'd say get vaccinated, because we're going to lose our political power if you people start dying off and get sick. But that they aren't taking that kind of approach. I mean, a couple other things is that I think we're in a really dangerous period. I listened to a little sports radio programming, and there's all this celebration that all these sporting events like the football games, they're going to allow the stadiums to get full of people. I mean, what is going to be the outcome of all these people yelling in a sports stadium at these sporting events? It's going to be probably rapid spread of COVID. It's not just in the schools, the elementary school kids who are going to be getting it, but I can't imagine that people are going to emerge from these sports stadiums without being involved in spreading the disease even more so. So I think that's dangerous. That's part of the irrationality of our system. The other thing is that, and I was buying into this back in May and June, I thought, oh, we're getting vaccinated, we're going to be safe, we can go back to quote normal unquote. And this attitude in the society is that you can solve all of our problems by some kind of technological device, in this case being a vaccine. And it just doesn't work that way. As far as I'm concerned, the vaccine is great. I'm glad I have it. It's probably protected me and protecting my loved ones. But that's always the mentality. We just need the technology and it will solve everything. And maybe people can talk about this, but I think there's this mindset that this is how you solve, like global warming can be solved by some kind of technological fix. And it really boils down to capitalism. So China may be doing a better job, but if their economy is going back, that means they're producing more crap that we don't need that has to be disposed of. I mean, what on earth do they need electric cars for in China? What you need is a mass transportation system. Electric cars is going to put greater pressure on the environment. And then you got to dispose of these things. And there's all the resources that have to be gathered that are probably going to be result in exploiting more people in third world countries to provide the resources for their goddamn Teslas and vehicles like that. So I don't know, I'm ranting, but I just really want to say that what we're dealing with should become as no surprise, because we live in an irrational system, and an irrational system does not come up with rational solutions. So I'm certainly someone who says, of course, we need a rational system, and socialism is the only way that that's going to be achieved. At least my understanding of socialism, and it's not the understanding of socialism put out by people like Bernie Sanders, those type of folks. So thanks.
Hey, Madeline, and then John. Oh, John.
I just want to say I'm overdue. I have to leave. But
Okay.
please keep me posted. I found it very interesting, and I put something on the chat line.
Put your email on the chat.
Okay.
So we can
Great.
contact you. Okay, Madeline.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us, John.
Thank you. Stephen, you are saving the chat for us?
Yes, I'll save the chat.
Okay. Yeah, and I just have two little sort of things. And that's that I hear people saying, well, okay, I'm not going to die of COVID. I'll just get a little case of it. And then you have the long haulers. That terrifies me as a teacher. Brain fog, give me a break. Are we going into, I mean, we have enough brain problems as a species. We need all the brain power we can get. And so the COVID, if it doesn't kill you, it seems to put you in a brain fog. And, you know, stupid is stupid, folks. And I don't want any more. We need smarts. So I'm really concerned, and I try to keep up with articles and all, because it seems like there aren't that much research into brain fog. And as an educator, I really want to know, because I think some of the students are people are taking more kind of risk because, well, it's not going to kill me. I might get a little case of it, but they may be just destroying their whole future, because if we don't have our brain power, what are we? So I really worry about that. I worry that not only is COVID killing people, but suicide rates are spiking terribly because of the depression. I read someplace where there may be ultimately as many people die of suicide as COVID. I mean, that's a terrible thought, but again, the data is not terribly clear, and it's affecting the younger folks. I've kept track of teenage suicides for many decades because I find that so tragic, and it's just getting terrible. So we need to follow that. But on an upper note, when I said about my life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, I'm a concert pianist. I'm a musician. I tell my students, you got to have some joy in your life. And if you're going to face 10 years or a future that's just dismal, you got to have something. And there is data out there that about people's satisfaction with their jobs now, and mostly people aren't. And the data went, however, into what kind of job would you like to have that you don't have. Number one, a job in the creative arts. It is a function of our brain and a function of our humanity to have joy and to appreciate and be part of some sort of an aesthetic experience. And I don't want that forgotten. And that's what I keep preaching to my students, is that please, wherever you are in all of this going on right now, think of something that makes you happy. And I think we have to do that for ourselves and as many people as we can convince. So that's my soapbox. I said I'd give you my soapbox.
Thank you, Madeline. I really appreciate that. And I think we've had a good discussion. We'll put this up for those who couldn't make it, because we definitely want to get this information out about the need to implement a zero COVID policy. Difficult as it may seem at this time, we're putting the ideas out. And I would like to say that we've talked about a World Day of Action for a zero COVID worldwide. I think that's really what we need. It's not a California, US issue, it's an international issue. And I think pushing for a global day of action for zero COVID would be an important way of making this an international issue.